Welcome back, everybody. My name is Tucker to our second NBA redraft. Last time we did the 2003 draft, if you missed that, and now we're moving on to 2004, which I'm going to be honest, especially in comparison to 2003, this is a rough class to redraft. The top spot is pretty self-explanatory. Beyond that, there is going to be a lot of discussion about where people should have gone because there are a lot of just middling players, in my opinion, in this class. Not one of the better classes we're going to redraft. I'm interested to see down in the comment section below what you guys have to say about where you would put some of these players. And of course, as always, we're not only going to be redrafting these players in the ranking in which I think they should have been drafted, but we're also going to be talking about how this affects each of these teams moving forward in the NBA. So with all those things said, all the typical stuff, subscribe if you're new, like the video, helps me out a ton. Various socials at the bottom of the screen, a link tree down below. With those things said, let's get started. So at number 1, it's Dwight Howard. The Orlando Magic select Dwight Howard here. They selected him back in 2004. It was a slightly controversial because Emeka Okafor was presumably going to be the first pick throughout most of the college season as he was the veteran, had a great season. But the Magic chose to select the upside of the high school player Dwight Howard, and it ended up being a fantastic decision. You can talk about the later stages of Dwight Howard's career, and he certainly had issues, whether it be his exit from Orlando or his exit from LA or his exit from Houston or all the other teams he's bounced around to. But that initial stretch in Orlando, including a finals appearance in 2009, is one of the more dominant big man stretches that we've seen in modern NBA history. Dwight Howard's a Hall of Fame player. He's going to go number 1 here. Number 2 to Charlotte. Originally, this was Emeka Okafor. It is not going to be Emeka Okafor in the redraft. I think this is relatively clear unless someone wants to provide an argument otherwise. I think Andre Iguodala is the second pick in this draft going to Charlotte. There are some other guys with, there's a guy here with an All-NBA selection. There's some All-Star appearances here that maybe you could make the case. But for me personally, I think Andre Iguodala is going to go number 2. As far as this affects the Hornets, this creates a nice, interesting little wing duo there in Charlotte where they no longer have at Okafor, but they've got Gerald Wallace and Andre Iguodala on the wings. So it's a nice little wing duo. Gerald Wallace is just 22 at the time. And unfortunately, this just doesn't add enough talent to them to really change their outlook significantly in terms of their wins moving forward. Okafor was really good as a rookie and then kind of, plateaued, and that was about as good as he was ever going to be. Iguodala should continue to improve and get better, and if they keep Wallace and Iggy together, that's a really, really cool wing duo in Charlotte, worst case. Unfortunately, not a ton of talent here at the top of the draft for them to completely change their franchise in this redraft. Next up now at number 3, the Chicago Bulls. This is a very, very weird one. Originally, they went with Ben Gordon, and the 2004-2005 Chicago Bulls were actually pretty decent. And this selection I'm about to make, I think is the correct one ranking-wise, but actually makes the 04-05 Bulls worse, and probably significantly worse. I'm going to go with Al Jefferson with the 3rd overall pick here. Made an All-NBA team in Charlotte, is one of the more consistent post scorers that we've seen over the last 15 or so years, and I think that he's had the most successful career, and he needs to go number 3 overall here to Chicago. Now, the reason that makes them worse is, as we've talked about in the 2003 draft, they don't really need any more bigs. We gave them Chris Kaman in the 2003 draft because I felt like that was the right ranking, but I mentioned there that they had Tyson Chandler, they had Eddie Curry, and now we're giving them another big guy here in Al Jefferson. And Gordon was really good as a rookie for Chicago. They had a nice little guard group there. They ended up with Luol Deng as well, who we'll talk about a little bit later. And that kind of, jump-started a relatively nice period of success there in Chicago. And with Al Jefferson on the roster, he's obviously very, very good and helps them, but doesn't fit their roster quite as well because Eddie Curry, from a statistical standpoint, was actually pretty good in this 04-05 season. And it makes their roster a little bit weird. I think this is still the correct ranking, and that's how we're going to do this. We're going to rank things correctly, and then we're going to kind of evaluate where things go from there. But that's where I'm at right now with Chicago with the 3rd pick. Next up now at number 4. This is the LA Clippers. They originally picked Sean Livingston, who obviously had the really unfortunate knee injury, had a nice later stage of his career, but is not going to go forth here. I'm going to go with Luol Deng here at the number 4 overall pick. And maybe there are some other players down the road that you think should have gone ahead of Deng, but when he was healthy, when he was really good, he was one of the best two-way wings in the league, and that is a incredibly valuable player to have on your roster. The fact that he goes number 4 shows you the kind of draft class that we're dealing with here. Someone like Chris Bosh was going number 4 in the 2003 draft. Granted, that's one of the best drafts of the last 20 years, but still kind of shows you what we're dealing with here in the 2004 draft. Now, as this relates to the 04-05 Clippers, they were surprisingly competent. They had Elton Brand, they had Corey Maggette, they had Chris Kaman, who in our redraft is no longer on this roster, but as we continue along that thread, we actually gave them Boris Diaw in 2003, and now they've got Luol Deng, and that's a ton of wings and forwards between Brand, Maggette, Deng, and Diaw. But I still think this is the right ranking, and that creates a nice, interesting little team. If they want to be really, really, progressive with what they want to do, they can go, Brand at the 5, and then they've got Maggette, Diaw, and Deng as all of the wings. They find one good guard, and they're in there. Obviously, they did need a guard, and that's why they selected Livingston when they did, and that is still an issue, but Luol Deng, when healthy, is one of the most underrated two-way players of this era, and I think is someone that really helps this Clippers team and certainly deserves to go 4th in this redraft. If they get one guard or two guards here, they can be a really, really good, really interesting, and almost modern team there in LA. Next up now, number 5 is Washington. This pick was actually traded to Dallas. Initially, it was Devin Harris. I'm going to keep it as Devin Harris here. Made an all-star team, was involved in a couple of significant trades throughout his career. Really good player, nothing groundbreaking, but I think it makes sense for him to go 5th here, and then we can just move on to the 6th pick. Next up now at number 6, this was originally Josh Childress. Everybody remember Josh Childress? Big afro, super high upside guy that, went overseas and then came back. This pick is Atlanta's. They're not taking Josh Childress. They're going to take Ben Gordon, and you could argue that Ben Gordon should have gone earlier than this. He had some really nice moments in his career, absolutely, but I think 6 is the correct selection. Now, that 2004-2005 Hawks team was awful. This is a team that I honestly did not even know existed when I was doing my research for this. I saw some of the lineups they were running, and I couldn't believe it. This is a Ty Lue, Al Harrington, Antoine Walker Atlanta Hawks team that wins 13 games in the 04-05 season. Ben Gordon certainly helps make them more competent, absolutely, but nothing groundbreaking here. But I do think that he goes number 6 here to Atlanta. Next up now, number 7. This is where things get really, really interesting from a long-term view, because this is Phoenix's selection. And Phoenix obviously ends up becoming really, really good over these next couple of seasons as they figure out the Steve Nash era Suns, right? The problem is their owner was being wildly cheap and actually decided to basically give away the 7th pick in the draft. He didn't want to pay a rookie at whatever salary they would have been making with the 7th pick. So they trade this pick for a future pick that becomes Nate Robinson. Like they basically give away the 7th pick. And this pick initially was Luol Deng. That went to Chicago. That's how Chicago ended up with both Ben Gordon, not Eric Gordon, both Ben Gordon and Luol Deng in this draft, because Phoenix gave this pick away. If they kept this pick, I'm giving them Trevor Ariza here, who would have been perfect, a perfect complementary wing in a similar way that Luol Deng would have been, but I think Ariza is a slightly worse player. That's why he's lower down in the redraft. But Trevor Ariza would have been perfect for those Suns teams as a wing defender, as a guy that can shoot, provide them such great defense. That would have been an awesome fit. However, in this scenario, if we're continuing along the same thread, Phoenix still doesn't want to pay for this pick, and so they send it to Chicago. And so Chicago ends up with, who did we give them? Al Jefferson and Trevor Ariza, which makes that Bulls team actually pretty decent moving forward. A really interesting one to take a look at there. It's upsetting to look at what happened with Phoenix here and the fact they just basically gave a pick away. I'm giving them Trevor Ariza in this redraft. Next up now, number 8, Toronto. Originally went with Rafael Araujo, who made very little impact in the NBA. And this is a fun one because at this point, they have Chris Bosh, they have Jalen Rose, thank you, I put Rose, I couldn't remember his first name. Mo Peterson, Vince Carter, who mails it in and is gone 20 games later. But I'm giving them Josh Smith here, and you could make the argument that simply from a peak, from an upside standpoint, Josh Smith should have been significantly higher in this redraft. I'm fine if you want to make that case. The longevity makes it difficult, and I'm not convinced that at any point Josh Smith actually did really good winning basketball things, so he's a little bit lower in the redraft, but still, him being in Toronto is not the end of the world. Him and Chris Bosh in the front court would have been awesome if they had the foresight to run Bosh at the 5 and Smith at the 4, really those two things being interchangeable. That would have been an awesome fit there in Toronto, would have made them a very, very exciting group, and that's why I'm giving them Josh Smith at the number 8 pick, also because I think that's the correct redraft. At number 9 now, this is Philadelphia. They're probably the biggest loser here because they went with Andre Iguodala, who is now the 2nd overall pick in the draft. But I'm giving them Jameer Nelson as a guard. And Nelson plays an important role here on a playoff team in the 2004-2005 season for Philly. But not having Andre Iguodala in Philadelphia certainly changes some things down the road in a couple of different ways. Are the Sixers more active in moving on from the Allen Iverson era now that they have Jameer Nelson there as kind of the next guard? Or do they play it a little bit slower because Andre Iguodala quickly became, the other AI and, became more of a name and made them a little bit more comfortable with moving on from Allen Iverson? I'm not sure which way they go with that, but also remember that the eventual Dwight Howard trade, the big Dwight Howard trade that sent Iguodala to Denver and Andrew Bynum to Philly and Dwight Howard to LA and basically was the first step in the process, they weren't trying to make it the first step in the process, but Andrew Bynum did literally nothing. If Philadelphia doesn't have Iggy, how does that whole situation go down? Because Bynum is the big piece that ends up going to Philly here, and that makes the way for Dwight to show up in LA. Does Dwight still become a Laker, or does it become a Net? Because that was something that was heavily considered at the time. I have no idea. I don't know how all that breaks down, but still, that's an interesting thing to think about without Andre Iguodala now in Philadelphia and with Jameer Nelson in his place at the 9th overall pick. Next up now at number 10 is the Cleveland Cavaliers. The 04-05 Cavs won 42 games, did not make the postseason in LeBron's second season, and I'm going to give them Emeka Okafor as a solid big. Obviously, they have Ilgauskas and Varejao already on the roster, but Okafor as a rookie was really, really good. Probably pushes this team towards the postseason. It would be nice if they could get a guard or a wing to help LeBron here, because it is very suspect in the backcourt there in Cleveland at this point. But this is just the correct ranking. Okafor goes to Cleveland. And we're going to kind of speed through these last couple because there's not really a huge impact on these rosters long-term or on these teams long-term until we get to the 15th pick. So 11, Golden State, I'm going to give them J.R. Smith. If you want to make the argument he should be higher, that's fine. He adds to a guard group that already includes Baron Davis and Jason Richardson. That's a really, really fun group there in Golden State. Number 12, Seattle. They're going to get Kevin Martin. The 04-05 Sonics got Ray Allen. They were really, really good. And Martin gives them a nice little scoring punch alongside Ray Allen and Rashard Lewis. That's a really nice pick. Kevin Martin, one of the more underrated players certainly in this class. You could argue he could have gone higher. 13, Portland is going to be Tony Allen. The defensive specialist goes to Portland, helps them be better defensively. 14, Utah is going to be Anderson Varejao. And 15 is the big one. Boston initially got Al Jefferson here. That's the important part. I'm going to give them Sean Livingston just because of what he did in the back half of his career. I think Sean Livingston is a really good winning player. If he never gets hurt, his career is wildly, wildly different. The reason that this is significant, however, is Al Jefferson is no longer in Boston here. He is now, where did I put him? In Chicago. Al Jefferson was a pretty critical piece of the eventual Kevin Garnett trade that sent Garnett to Boston and eventually ended up winning them the title in 2008. If Al Jefferson is not in Boston, are they still able to make as competitive of an offer to Minnesota in exchange for Kevin Garnett? I don't know. And if you say no, what that probably means is Phoenix ends up with Kevin Garnett. It was very, very heavily rumored that that was a place that he wanted to go. It was going to involve multiple different pieces. They were going to figure out a way to make it happen. Ultimately, Boston came in with what was supposedly a better offer, and that includes Al Jefferson. When Al Jefferson is not included here, maybe Kevin Garnett ends up being a Phoenix Sun. And so the overarching point of the 2004 redraft here is that the Phoenix Suns missed out on a lot. Not only did they give away their pick, which we know about, they could have had, in that initial scenario, Luol Deng. In this scenario, they could have had Trevor Ariza. Either way, huge improvements for them. But also the fact that Al Jefferson ended up going 15 to Boston and became a significant part of the KG trade potentially took them out of the running for KG as well. So Phoenix definitely losing out here in the 2004 redraft. But that is going to be the end of today's video, and I thank you all very much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. I upload twice a day, every day, all throughout the NBA season. It's a great place for consistent NBA content. You can leave a like rating on the video. It really helps me out, and you can check me out at various socials in a link tree down in the description below. With all those things said, I hope you guys have an awesome rest of your day, and I will see you all next time.